Exercise Confidence listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. In this episode, I sit down with Nick Mariduena. Nick has a very scientific approach in some regards to confidence and the way that he shares his story. Some of the things we touch on are his fitness journey and also how he changed his career in a really big way from initially getting his degree in biochemistry, but now being a judicial assistant who advocates very fiercely for mental health in the LA area. Nick is really inspiring and very insightful in the way that he genuinely shares his own self-confidence journey. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode today on exercise confidence. Hey, Exercise Confidence listeners. Today I'm sitting down with Nick. Okay, you got to say your last name for me. How do you say it?
It's pronounced Mariduena.
Mariduena. So there we go. And we're really excited to have Nick today. Nick, thank you for being on the podcast.
Of course, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So Nick, I like to start it off with, in 20 seconds or less, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Wow, that's a very short window. I'm sure I just blew 12 seconds of that. Well, I'm a pretty outgoing person. I love being outdoors, working out, reading, playing video games. I'm also a huge nerd, so Star Wars, Lord of the Rings are all big things for me. Don't get me started on what Disney's done to them.
All right, looks like a sore subject, so we'll leave Disney out of this. Well, thanks. Thank you for a little bit of that backstory. So, Nick, one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is I've only had a few encounters with you, but every time I've been in your presence, you are a captivatingly confident person. And so, are you someone that's been confident your entire life?
As far as I can remember, yeah. I think my confidence is generally just broken down as being very extroverted. I'm pretty easy to talk to, and I don't mind initiating conversation. It just needs me to be in an atmosphere where, I'm comfortable with kind of taking the lead, which is most scenarios, I think.
Growing up, was there any time in your life where you can kind of attribute why you're such an outgoing person? Are you like the youngest of your siblings? Were your parents really outgoing? Did you have any examples of that?
Sure. So my dad is a very full-fledged choleric. He is very outgoing, very talkative, very friendly. He is a take charge kind of guy. And, I am the youngest. And if you put a whole lot of stock into this, I am also a Leo, which means that when I do interact with people, I get very passionate very easily. And it just means that I'm generally a pretty friendly guy unless you rub me the wrong way, which generally takes some effort, but pretty much for my entire life that I can remember, I've always enjoyed being, out and about with people. Although with time, I think my extroversion has become tempered a little bit because just realizing the different types of people there are out there and who I want to surround myself. So if I'm not extroverted around you, it means that I need to get to know you a little more before I show you that side of me.
That's a great way to approach life, especially as we get older. When we're young, we're like, oh yeah, I can be friends with everybody. And sometimes that can be a pitfall when you get older because people unfortunately take advantage of it, which sucks. But you can definitely battle through that. But you said something that I want to circle back to, the idea of a choleric, because some of our listeners may not know what that is. I literally just learned about these temperaments, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. So I identify as a powerful choleric for sure. But then there's melancholy, there's sanguine, and I'm blanking on the fourth one.
Phlegmatic.
Oh my gosh, phlegmatic, yeah. Because cholerics can't be in the same freaking situation as a phlegmatic, or else we'll just lose our minds.
Exactly.
Okay, so for listeners, choleric is somebody that has attributes of being go-getters, extroverted, confident, all the things that you think of when you
think of people that maybe could inspire you, like people that do TED Talks or whatever, but it's not always the case. And then Nick, I'll let you explain what a melancholy is, because you did let me know that that's kind of your temperament.
Yeah, so being a melancholy choleric, which means that I'm mostly melancholy with choleric tendencies, and that's like my kind of secondary characteristic or personality. Melancholies are generally very sensitive to their emotions. They're huge perfectionists. That is like the biggest thing about a melancholy, is that they're very perfectionist, which means that, you know, for anyone who's a perfectionist out there, they know like it's hard for them to start things because they don't want to start it unless they can A, finish it, or B, do it, you know, perfectly. Melancholies have a lot of emotions, and it can be difficult to find a way to incorporate those emotions into their lives without it hindering them. Another big part about melancholies is that they're actually pretty big introverts. They enjoy being alone. They enjoy kind of like solitary activities like reading. So that's definitely part of me.
I think it's interesting that you self-proclaimed as an extrovert and really being able to go up and talk to anybody, and then there's that caveat that melancholies are introverts, because for me it's the flip. Like cholerics are supposed to be like super extroverted, super like always wanting to engage with others, and I'm more of like I'm such an introvert. I love my me time. I love my alone time. And honestly, I realized it once I first started doing the podcast, because I'd interview people, and like after the time span of talking with them, I was like drained and exhausted. Yep. And I realized like I would have to schedule these to be on days where I have nothing else that needs my like pertinent attention and energy, because I learned that about myself. Like, oh, I'm an introvert. Like, oh my gosh, that's draining. Like I can do it and I enjoy it, but after I'm like, I need to unplug and recharge big time.
Yeah. I think ultimately you can either decide, you can find out which one you are in regards to how strong your social battery is.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
How long you can go in a social interaction without needing to recharge.
That is a great way to put it. Okay, listeners, so if you don't know if you're an introvert or an extrovert, take stock of your social battery next time you're interacting with people. If it goes out quick, you might be an introvert. And if you have a Duracell social battery, then you might be an extrovert. In terms of understanding temperament, so we talked about choleric, we talked about melancholy. Sanguines tend to be like happy-go-lucky, kind of just approach life in that very like whimsy way, and life of the party is how it was described to me. And then phlegmatics are very much like procrastinators, kind of like don't care to take charge. They go with the flow. They're like, whatever, apathetic.
Yeah, you can kind of think about them as the hippie version of both melancholy and cholerics, more laid back. Yeah, go with the flow.
That's a great way to put it. Now that we've kind of like touched on all of this temperament stuff, and listeners, I'll link a couple books that I use to kind of figure out my temperament and really help my self-growth personally. Did you feel like once you were aware of your temperament that it helped you better understand yourself for your own self-growth in any way?
Oh, definitely. Growing up, you know, being a melancholy choleric, you know, I am very extroverted. I like to interact with the kids at school growing up, playing sports and everything. But I would find that there were times when just randomly wouldn't be having a good day for whatever reason. My emotions were just kind of like more sensitive, and I had no idea why. Like it didn't make sense to me. Things that would upset me or excite me more than normal were like throwing me off the charts. And so I kind of had to learn that to recognize that some days I just had were just bad days. They were just kind of days when I would just have to go with the flow, roll with the motion, because I would try to get things done those days, but just it was significantly harder for me to rein in emotions that, you know, I'm a very logical, scientific person. It doesn't make sense to me why I can't do X, Y, and Z when I plan to do X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden I look back and be like, oh, it's because of this interaction I had that really messed me up and, made the next day not a good day.
Yeah, I was totally like nodding my head in agreement on that, because that's definitely like how my frame of mind works. And so that's somewhere that I operate out of, and I'm very list oriented, right? So I'll like write down all the things I need to get done, and somewhere in there, if there's something that wasn't intended or maybe doesn't go as planned, I'm like, it'll throw me off. And in hindsight, I'm like, okay, why the heck did everything like go to crap that day? What happened in there? Oh, that's why. But instead, I'm very like hard on myself, and so I'll spend the whole day like beating myself up. But I've had to like retrain my brain to be like, no, that's not productive, and we don't do that anymore.
Absolutely.
When you got older and you were able to be aware of and recognize that about yourself, were there ways that you were able to implement things that could combat those triggers for you emotionally?
Well, one of the things that my dad has said to me growing up was that if someone can upset you, then they have control over you. And I kind of took that and ran with it. When I was younger, I was much more stubborn and didn't listen to him.
Yeah, I think none of us did.
Lo and behold, the old man actually knew a couple of things.
Who would have known?
Exactly, right? Like, he's only been alive for like 62 years now. But that was a big thing, learning to recognize my emotions and kind of like not being apathetic, but learning to question, where is this emotion coming from? Why am I feeling it? And then being able to move forward beyond that, it honestly comes down to just making a conscious decision. You are always in complete control of your emotions, in the sense that you can decide to move past them or not. It may be incredibly difficult, definitely not easy for some situations and some things that happen, but that's something I very much firmly believe, is that people can say or act however they want, but at the end of the day, you control your reaction, or at least your conscious reaction, because something can still upset you, but then you decide, okay, I'm not going to let this overpower me. So for me, it was just learning to start kind of questioning myself, and not in a negative, pessimistic kind of way, but in a I'm trying to learn kind of way, because that's a very, very big differentiation.
You said like a bunch of different things in there, like 3 of them I wrote down that were like so spot on, and I want to make sure we dive a little deeper and touch on more. Let's go with making conscious decisions, because ironically, that's something that I've been touching a lot on in some of the posts that I've been putting on exercise confidence these past couple weeks, because I have actively, consciously learned how to like shift my mind from, oh, it is what it is, or oh, it just wasn't meant to be, to like, no. The theme of like my mind lately has been, you're either going to make an excuse or you're going to make a way for it to happen. And I like that you were talking about that in terms of, you make a decision, right? And so that's not always an easy thing to do. And I guess in regards to, with you specifically, you have like started this public, quote unquote, fitness journey, right? Yeah. That you like are putting out there, and I love it. It's inspiring, and it's also another reason why I wanted you on the podcast. And so making that decision to not only, 1, start on this journey, but 2, make it public. Let's talk about that, because that's what I would love to get into. Like, why was this what you chose to put your energy into?
Sure. So being physically fit has always been a big hobby of mine. Growing up, I always played sports, and I loved it, and I'm competitive. I'm a choleric. I have competition issues. So winning
Preach.
is like it.
Oh, preach.
if you're not winning, you're not having fun, sort of thing, which I know is a total lie. You can still have fun without winning, quote unquote.
I'm just kidding. I'm super competitive too, so I'm like, everything you're saying, I'm like, oh, my soul is agreeing with yours. Like, no, you can obviously
no such thing as a moral victory.
No, like, you can obviously still, listeners, we're joking. You can obviously still have tons of fun without winning, unless you're a caloric.
Absolutely. No, for me, when I was younger, that's what, I focused on. And so for me, physical fitness has been something that I've always strived for. And kind of recently, I'd probably say within the last, probably about 4 years ago, I started going to the gym, and I went sporadically. And, I would kind of pick out whichever guy I thought was like the buffest and be like, I want to be bigger than him, or I want to be lifting heavier than him, or I want to reach this point, And I just kind of kept doing that over and over again. And eventually it got to a point where I started actually seeing results. I mean, it took years. I went sporadically for about a year and a half, and then started going more regularly, and have subsequently increased the number of times I actually do work out. But the reason why I wanted to start like this kind of fitness journey with other people and kind of make it public is because there's a lot of influencers out there who, focus on physical appearance and how to get this kind of in shape. And, it's a lot of great stuff and good content, and it's good-hearted, of course. But I think what I really wanted to focus on was more of the mental aspect of it. Mental health issues have become the forefront of everyone's mind in the last year and a half. As someone who actually works kind of in mental health adjacent, I see it all the time. So I wanted to provide another outlet or another source for people that wasn't just about getting the awesome looking body that you want, but also having the mentality that makes you a beautiful person, not just physically.
That is so awesome. I love the sentiment that you shared about why it's important to you and how it kind of cultivated itself in your life and why you're doing it publicly. The work that you do, what is that? What is the line of work that you're in?
Sure, I'm a judicial assistant in the mental health courthouse. I sit in the courtroom all day, and I listen to these cases, and I'm taking notes on all of them, making sure that the record is clear. Because at the end of each case hearing, I will type up a minute order, which is kind of like a synopsis or a summary of everything that happened. This attorney made this motion, the judge ruled this way, the judge ordered this, or anything else. And with that kind of exposure, you hear about all these defendants or respondents in some circumstances where, the person may have allegedly committed a crime, and as a result, when they're in the criminal court, the judge or the public defender is like, hey, I don't know if this person can completely understand what's going on. We want to make sure that they can understand the proceedings and that they can aid in their own defense. So when that happens, they get sent over to the mental health court, and from there they get evaluated by a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist writes up a report, and it'll go one of two ways. If they are competent to understand what's going on, then they'll just go right back to the criminal court. But if they're not competent, or found to be not competent, then they will be ordered to participate in some kind of treatment. One of the big things that our courthouse has been really pushing for is community-based restoration programs, which for those defendants that are eligible for that, it has made tremendous it has given them positive effects, where they're able to, be in a secure setting where they're getting treatment, where they're getting medication, where they're being able to go to groups with other people who are also in this similar situation. So I'm like very much in the thick of the mental health battle for LA.
No, that's such meaningful work. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for
Sure.
sharing. We appreciate that. Dealing with such taxing situations in the work that you do and what you are coming across every day, do you feel that being physically fit and being committed to your health in terms of exercising, working out, helps with your mental clarity on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. I originally was in the routine of going to the gym after work, and it would be great because all the stress and the aggravation of being at work, despite even if you love your work, it can always be taxing on you. And so being able to go to the gym after work has been great for me to help kind of renew and revitalize myself. However, there was a time where I actually started going to the gym before work, and I actually noticed that was had even more positive effect on my attitude throughout the day, and kind of like staying power at 100%, as opposed to getting up. I don't drink coffee. I don't know how I do it. I just don't. But getting up in the day,
breaking my heart. No coffee? I'm a coffee fiend. It's probably bad.
It's the smell. I can't. I don't know. Anyways, but I get up. I'm tired, trying to move, get ready for work. I get to work, and I'm maybe at 75%, and then by the end of the work day, I'm at like 40%. And that's when I get to the gym, and by the end of the gym, I'm back at 100%. But when I would go to the gym before work, I'd wake up, go to the gym. I wouldn't be able to lift or do as much because my energy level just wasn't there. But after I'd get home from the gym, shower, get ready for work, and go to work, I noticed that I was starting work at like 95, 100%, like feeling so much better for the rest of the day. And exercising for me has been a tremendously helpful outlet for my own physical and mental health.
The first time you went into like a gym with like this goal of, okay, I'm going to get to where I want to be, whatever that looked like for you, was it intimidating at all, or were you just ready to throw yourself into it?
I would say it was definitely both. Even though I'm a very outgoing person and very competitive person, I have no problem walking up to like the biggest guy that I meet on like a football field or a basketball court and be like, I'm guarding you. Like, I have no problem doing that. That's just my mentality. But even still, you still feel kind of this anxiety, like nervousness. Everyone's looking at me like I'm the new guy at the gym. Like, I don't know what kind of machines or equipment they have. Like, even if I've walked through before, like, something simple as going to the locker room to change. Like, it's always the first time at a new gym, even the first couple of times are always a little like, okay, stay in my shell and just get through the day.
Yep. Yeah. I get that. Okay, like being somebody that is going to go up and guard the biggest guy on like a basketball court or something, like that's never me. I like try to size up somebody that's like me and go after that. But again, I feel like that just stems from like some kind of deep-rooted belief in yourself and your abilities. So with like your family life and your home life growing up, like would you say like one or both of your parents was a really great example of that kind of self-assured like boldness and confidence for you, or like maybe a sibling?
Oh, definitely. My dad both of my parents are very athletically inclined. And so genetically speaking, I think I, got lucky with that because,
right.
It fell off or rubbed off on me. For one, there's that kind of like natural ability, but also I know that I had a great childhood. I know that I had a very loving family. I know that I'm extraordinarily lucky to have both my parents still married. I have 2 older siblings, both of which are very intelligent, very also athletically gifted. Like, so being the youngest was always like, man, like, I gotta like show everybody up. Like, I'm living in my sister, who's the oldest, is total alpha female. Like, you do not mess with her.
Love that. I might have to interview her.
Yeah, she's awesome. My brother is a little more laid back. He's much more calculated, much more observant, very okay with letting things come to him, but he's still fiercely intelligent and fiercely competitive. And so for me, it was kind of like, man, growing up in that kind of environment, I had to learn how to be one of the pack, so to speak.
Oh, I like that. It's great because I think you also, at a young age, it sounds like, made a conscious decision to join in and, oh my God, I hate to say this, but like level up, for lack of a better term.
I hate that first too, but yeah.
Right, and instead of like allowing it to intimidate you or overwhelm you or make you want to become more meek, instead of following suit and pursuing that same kind of like boldness in all things that you try to tackle. Do you think that is more of a nature or nurture aspect, at least in your own experience?
Well, I think for me personally, and I'm sure that this is definitely going to cause debate, or at least an extended conversation for other people who may listen to this, but for me personally, I know that it's more nature. I went to school for biochemistry, got my degree in it, and I gotta tell you, man, genetics are a very powerful thing. I think nurture is also incredibly important. People are very much socialized in certain ways. However, their genetic biological inclinations are not to be understated or underestimated. When you think about if someone is confident in themselves, I generally think of, or people generally think that they have high self-esteem. And I am not a fan of that word, self-esteem, because it boils down to how good you feel about yourself, which is not a very scientific thing, feeling good about yourself. Not to mention the fact that you're constantly trying to improve yourself. So, like, why should you feel good about yourself? Because you know that you're inadequate in X, Y, or Z. So why should you be okay with that? So for me, it comes down to how innately extroverted you are, which that is kind of an innate thing. But you can, definitely instill that kind of habit in people. It's not that you make them less anxious, it's that you make them more courageous. And, psychology, I've been listening to this podcast by this guy, Dr. Jordan Peterson, and, as a clinical psychologist, he's, read a lot of this stuff and done his own experiments and written his own papers on these things. And he has some very powerful evidence to back up. It's not about making you feel less bad about yourself or even more good about yourself. It's about doing more for yourself.
I really love that. Like, I wrote it down here, not less anxious, more courageous. And it's interesting because I think when we're focusing on trying to better ourselves or change something about ourselves or what have you, we think that there has to be like this elimination process, right? Like whatever it is, like even when it comes to something like losing weight, which people try to do all the time, every day. Like, oh, I have to eliminate these pounds from myself rather than I have to build more muscle strength or build more stamina, right? And
yeah.
So I like that view shift from less to more, and the fact that what you were saying about this podcast and the doctor that you listen to. What's the name of the podcast so we could link it in case any of our listeners want to take it?
Dr. Jordan Peterson.
It's just under his name?
Yeah.
Sweet.
It's just under.
All right, cool. Yeah, definitely want to link that. But yeah, all of that you just said is super relevant, I think, in ways that maybe are very understated, especially nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
And in terms of like the whole mental health thing that we talked about. Going back to your degree is in biochemistry and
yes.
You're a judicial assistant. How did that leap occur?
You know, growing up, I always loved watching the science and history channels. Nat Geo and everything, Discovery was always on TV for me whenever I had the remote, which was rare being the youngest. But I've always had like this fascination with science and the world around us, and especially with mathematics. I think math is, this is going to sound crazy, but I think math is incredibly beautiful, and physics to me is just math in motion. So I started out as a physics major, but quickly realized it was a little more than I thought that I wanted.
I think a lot of us start in one major and then completely end up with something that's at least a caveat or different.
Absolutely. So I searched around, took a couple of different classes and different things, thought about criminology, thought about sociology, linguistics, because languages are big for me. And at the time I was taking, classes for my physics major, and one of them was chemistry, and I had always liked chemistry. It's just that there was this certain aspect, it's a very simple aspect, very simple understanding in chemistry that you have to have that just wasn't clicking for me yet, because I had taken chemistry in high school and I'd taken kind of an intro chemistry class before this one. But eventually in this second class that I took, it clicked. And from then I was just like, oh my gosh, this is how this works. And for me, it was just like a no-brainer. Like, I love chemistry and I love biology and I love understanding how everything works. So that's how it ended up going into biochemistry. I'm probably one of the few people that you'll hear this from, but I loved OChem. I loved it.
I rolled my eyes right now, listeners, because I liked OChem more than Gen Chem. Like, general chemistry was like the bane of my existence, and I barely scraped by. And I got to OChem, and I think it has something to do with really getting down to like the shape of the molecules. That was like really like click, because visually, I guess, for me, in structures and such. So I didn't hate it, but I wouldn't say like I want to take it to I want to take it to the prom or anything. It's like I don't love it.
Well, for me, I loved it because it was exactly what you said. You could finally see how everything works. Like, visually, it got broken down for me, and it was just, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. And so, while I went to school at Cal State Northridge, and while I was there, I was lucky enough to be a part of an internship that allowed me to work in a professor's research lab on her project. It was a tremendously awesome experience. I'm so incredibly grateful for it. I got to work with all kinds of different equipment, learn so much more in practice that I didn't get a chance to learn in my lectures. And after that, I knew that I wanted to be in that field. But after I graduated, I wanted to take a year off to work in the field and see what it was like. And so I did, and I had a couple of different jobs at different science companies, and I just realized that it wasn't for me. The way that they were working on things, just kind of the culture, the atmosphere, the environment, realizing that the industry portion of biochemistry wasn't what I had hoped for. So I never went back for my master's degree, although that's what I had planned. A couple of years passed by as I was doing kind of random odd jobs. For a little while, I was working with a real estate friend. I think everyone has that phase when they're looking for a job.
Oh, yeah, I've had some incredibly disconnected odd jobs in that phase of my life between undergrad and figuring out what's next.
Yeah, exactly. And then my brother had a colleague that he was working with who had a friend that told this guy, who then in turn told my brother about this job, he applied for it, got it as a judicial assistant. And then another year or two goes by and the job opening is still there. So I apply, and after going through their process, I got accepted. So it's been a long, windy journey.
Having such a passion for biochemistry and really having that click for you and finding this beauty in the sciences and math that you did in undergrad versus the reality of the industry as an adult going into work for it. How did you resolve that disconnect and kind of combat that disheartening heartache to be able to listen to yourself and shift your life instead of trudging through something that you were like, well, I kind of chose this, I'm just going to stick with it? Because we see it all the time. We see people that get a degree in something that they think they love or they love learning about. They get to it, the reality is they hate it, and they just stick with it for 20, 30, 40 miserable years.
There was a pretty big turning point for me in my life. I think it was when I turned 20 years old. My family and I were having our family dinner to celebrate my birthday, and it was just immediate family, brother, sister, mom, and dad. My dad sat us down and looked at both me and my brother, and he asked us a very simple but very strong question. He said, "Are you happy with your life and with where you're going?" And at the time, I think I might have still been a physics major. But either way, that question really stuck with me because it made me realize I am the only person living my life.
Yes.
Growing up, playing video games, you can switch between characters, you die, you respawn, you get a new life, you can do a different path or whatever. But realizing that no one else can live my life for me. And what that means is that I am responsible for my decisions, my choices, and the consequences, whether they be good or bad. I'm responsible for them. And it made me realize that I don't want to do anything that I don't want to do. So it was a very simple kind of paradigm shift for me, but it was still very impactful. The end result is my decision that I don't want to have any regrets, because if I regret something, that means that I didn't intentionally want it at one point. And for me, what that would have meant if I had any regrets going forward, it would have meant that I wasn't making decisions for me, that I was doing something for someone else because I was trying to get someone else's approval. And I didn't want to live like that anymore. I wanted to live for me and enjoy my life. And, it at the end of the day, it was just about taking responsibility for myself and making decisions to live however I chose to live.
I just love it. I love all of it. And I think a lot of people don't either have someone audibly, intentionally ask them if they're happy, but in turn, I think a lot of people don't really ask themselves that. And the whole realization of I'm the only one living my life is such an important thing, I think, for so many people to realize, because once that clicked for me, and I was older than you were when it happened for me, I was probably mid-20s, I'd say, which is still a lot earlier than it ever happens, if at all, for some people. Oh,
yeah. So many people don't ever experience that.
Yeah, but I was it came at a time when I was also behind in life. I hadn't gotten my bachelor's degree yet. I was already 24 or something, and I was feeling inadequate, and I was like, you know what? I am on nobody's timeline but my own. And it was kind of similar to your situation. I was having a conversation with my dad one night, at the kitchen counter, super random. Big shout out to Papa Nasari. He's the homie. Love my dad. But he was just he could tell I was just going through it. It was stuff because of school, because of work, the old relationship I was in at the time. And he could see I was weighed down. And he's he's from Iran. So he was all, talking to me in Farsi, Baba June, what is wrong? What, you don't look like yourself. And I expelled like all of my crap I was going through. And he was like, you know, I'm not gonna say it here, but he was like, F it, you know, like, so what? Like, it's not their life, it's your life. You don't like your major, change it. You're not happy in your relationship, leave it. Like, if it's not gonna get fixed, if you're not both willing to work on it, forget it. Like, and guess what? You're on nobody's timeline but your own. So you get your bachelor's next semester, 2 years from now, whatever. He's like, travel, enjoy your life. He's like, take it from me. Like, please listen. I've lived it all already. Like, you have to do what makes you your happiest in your life. And like, yes, you have to work for it. You can't just bob around doing nothing, but find what you love and do it on purpose.
Absolutely.
Like, all right, Dad.
And
Thanks.
I would kind of amend my dad's question from, are you happy, to, do you have meaning? Because happiness is so fleeting. It's a very shallow goal. It's very shallow. The point of your life is not to be happy, because very few times in your life are you actually happy.
I love how philosophical this is getting. I crave it. I love it.
But I mean, it's so true. Like people ask, what's the point of life? What's the meaning of life? And happiness is not the answer. I'll tell you that right now. If you're constantly chasing a feeling, then you are sadly mistaken. And you know, it's a much higher goal to chase meaning, to do something meaningful, whether that's, you know, starting a nonprofit organization, whether that's having a family, whether that's going to med school or law school, or even just raising a family, struggling, being a single parent. Like, there's so much meaning in so many of the things that people do. Like, everyone thinks that they need the latest gadget, or like the biggest house, or the nicest car, or the biggest muscles, or the best body for women. Like, it's not about those things. Like, people don't look low enough for God. That's I think that was said by Friedrich Nietzsche. Might have been Carl Jung. They're both very old psychologists or psychiatrists.
That is honestly something I've never heard, but it's a loaded sentiment, and I love it. I think it is something that can absolutely help, because, as you mentioned, it's almost like always chasing that next great thing that society puts worth on, but it only has worth because we choose to believe that it has that worth, and so many people choose to go after it. But there is such a beauty and simplicity. And I did this one workshop with a guy named Chris Pan. He runs a bunch of like nonprofits and companies, and fortunate enough to have an encounter. And it was about like, what do you want more of in your life, right? And when you got down to like, it came down to one word. Like, you had to find what your word was, right? But then the thought behind that is, so let's say somebody's word was happiness, right? They wanted more happiness. Then you had to take it one step further once you delve down all the way to funneling to this one word. It's like, well, what is happiness for you? Like, does that look like for you? Like, and just like you said, like, is it starting a family? Are all these different things in life? Because it's not one constant state of always happy, because then there's nothing to compare it to. You're not going to be happy. You're going to be just like stagnant. And even if you are happy, you're not going to fully embrace that. And so I think that's why I love sharing journeys about people on the podcast, because it allows us to have a form of contentment in our confidence journey where it is, but to also know that it doesn't end. Like, it never ends. Like, there's always something more. I don't want to say more, but there's always something down the road on the journey that is life.
Yeah.
And so I love that sentiment so much. So, tacking off of that quote that you said you're a reader. So are you currently reading anything that you think is worth sharing?
Oh God, the sci-fi fantasy nerd in me is coming out.
You're like the Similarian. It's the
Actually, I have not read it.
You haven't?
I've never read it.
You're wasting your time. What are you doing sitting here talking to me? Go read the book now.
I absolutely am.
Call yourself a fan.
No, that's on my list for sure. I have a very long list of books that I want to read, but the book that I'm reading now is by that guy, Dr. Jordan Peterson. It's called Maps of Meaning. He wrote that book as kind of like, it's kind of like his capstone. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't remember it. Like, kind of like his capstone dissertation, but it's like a full-on textbook sort of thing. Like,
you're reading a textbook?
I'm reading a textbook.
Wow. He's cut from a different cloth.
But it's all about the evolution of human psychology, and how it's been instantiated from even the earliest stages of life. For instance, he talks about how your central nervous system, parts of it have been conserved through evolution since lobsters came into existence. And lobsters are really old. Lobsters are older than trees. Before trees ever evolved, there were lobsters. And lobsters have very similar nervous systems to our own, especially when it comes to how dopamine affects it. And so it's really cool to see that if you give antidepressants to lobsters, it actually has positive effects similar to those that it has on humans.
Makes me happy for the lobsters. Gives me a little dopamine.
But I'm not doing it justice. He talks about how the evolution of humans and how stories have been conserved. So on his podcast, you'll see that he has this series that he's done on the Book of Genesis. And it's completely based in psychology. Like, he doesn't discuss theology or anything like that. It's very specifically about the psychology of those stories in the Book of Genesis. And it's incredibly fascinating to read those, to learn that parts of who you are so deeply conserved in all of humanity that there are reasons why we all connect with certain stories. Like, who everyone is fundamentally, they're all in their own hero myth, their own hero story. Like, everyone is either the main character of their own story or letting themselves be the side character of someone else's story.
Yeah, that's super true. It sounds like a really interesting book, so if any of the listeners are interested in hearing it, we'll link it below. Like, legit, you're laughing at me. I'm serious. It does sound interesting because it's going back to what you're saying about, like, the lobsters and the way that their nervous system almost is, in a way, mirror of ours, and antidepressants will help them the same way that they can affect a human that maybe has a chemical imbalance. Like, I'm somebody that, as a whatever, caloric, as just me, as whatever, I get anxious and I overthink like crazy, and I have to, like, actively, consciously, like, physically grab my own thoughts and be like, no, we're not doing that. And when I get to a point where it's overwhelming, I remember one time, it's like way back after an incident I had gone through in life and I needed a therapist. She was like, well, you know what you can always tell yourself, right? And I was like, oh, she's going to give me the secret to life to help me overcome my anxiety. Like, what? Tell me, what can I tell myself? And she's like, just tell yourself, like, it's all chemical. I was like literal mid panic attack. I was like sobbing in her office, and I just started cracking up. And so now it doesn't always obviously snap me out. There are some days that I don't know, I go through it, and then there's days when I'm fine. But some of those moments when I can, you know, do a little memory recall, I'm like, what are you freaking out about? It's all chemical. Like,
exactly.
It's not your fault it's messing up. Like,
well, I would amend my earlier answer about which books and everything for a little lighter of a read. The Alchemist is an incredible book.
Oh, love The Alchemist.
And so is Tuesdays with Morrie.
We will link all of these books, listeners. If you're readers, I highly suggest grabbing a physical copy and just taking some time with some iced tea or coffee or water or wine or whatever and enjoying these books. And if you're not a reader and you're a listener, and that's obviously why you're listening to a podcast, try Audible. I think any way that you can ingest information that is going to be best suited for your style is great.
And Tuesday with Morrie is actually a movie. So.
Oh, even better. If you're not audio, go for the visual. I've never read Tuesdays with Morrie, but I see it on all these book lists that it's like amazing.
It really is.
All right, well then I'll put that on my list too. But The Alchemist was like a game changer for me too, because I don't know why I felt so like intrinsically connected with this book. And I've reread it so many times, and I highlight my books, and there's so many markings all over this poor thing, but...
Oh my god, I would hate you. Don't touch my books.
That's why they're my books. So.
Leave them in mint condition.
Not me. Those babies look like they have been well read. Like, big time. You can tell, like, oh, she loves that one. She loves that book. It's a mess. No, but honestly, I think that this time that we've been able to talk and share has been really impactful, really empowering. I think that there are a lot of things in here that hopefully the listeners can take away from it. If you had one piece of advice to give our listeners so that they could exercise confidence every day, what would it be?
Do as little as you need to each time. What I mean by that is just baby steps. I'm kind of trying out a new catchphrase for myself. As a perfectionist, one of the things I fear most is failure. So this new catchphrase that I'm trying out is fail better each time, meaning fail a little less or do a little more, but let it be your decision.
One of the books that I read, one of the pieces of advice was to fail fast, fail often, and succeed as quickly as possible.
There you go.
So that's a great motto. Thank you for sharing your special catchphrase with the rest of us civilians. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
But no, I appreciate all the sentiments you shared today. I know without a doubt there is a wealth of information that somebody is going to just absolutely soak up from what you shared. So thank you so much, honestly, sincerely, especially during these unprecedented times, to just take this time and really earnestly share your story and how you exercise confidence. So thank you so much for being on today, Nick.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And then if you want to follow or connect with Nick, we will link his socials and such in the bio. So have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Bye.
Okay, listeners, there you have it, our episode with Nick. I think one of the biggest things I hope you can take away from this episode is not being afraid to fail. If we're being honest, failure is inevitable in life, and that's absolutely okay. What matters is getting back up after the failure and continuing courageously pressing on in our journeys and towards our goals. I thank Nick for being on the show and for sharing his advice and opinions with us today. Tune in next week as we sit down with Molly Crawford. Molly is a wildly accomplished woman who works in the PR industry, and we talk about how her confidence journey has been a very winding one, but also a very successful one that she is still journeying on. So we'll see you next time you tune in. Signing off, I am JR Nasari, and I truly hope that you find a way to exercise confidence every day.